Chapter 6. Caleb looked past Sheila, who was at the front counter, to the kitchen, spotting Natalie. She was working hard, and she didn't appear to notice him, which pleased him. He could look at her unnoticed for a moment or two. "What can I get you?" Sheila asked. Caleb had never been fond of the woman. They'd been in school together, and she'd chased after Benjamin with everything she had inside her, but he'd never been even the slightest bit interested. She'd gossiped about their family in a way that made him shake with fury. When he'd heard Natalie had hired her, he'd almost said something, but he wouldn't let himself become the same type of person she was, someone who would gossip at the least provocation. Nick looked over the food in the display case. "Anything?" he asked Caleb. "You sure?" "I'm sure." "Pick what you want." "One thing only." "I'm not going to have you hyped up on sugar all day." "Yes, sir." Nick contemplated the decision with the single-mindedness of a toddler trying to decide which toy he wanted. "I want peanut butter fudge." "Good choice," Caleb told him, grinning. "And I'll have raspberry fudge." "I haven't gotten to try that yet." "And 2 bottles of water." He looked up, feeling Natalie's eyes on him, and he winked at her. She blushed for a moment with confusion, but then she smiled. Caleb couldn't possibly be the kind of person Sheila claimed, but she'd find out for sure. "What's Nick doing out of school?" "He's not sick?" "No, he's fine. He has an appointment this afternoon that he couldn't miss." Caleb hated lying to her. He promised himself that just as soon as he could, he would tell her absolutely everything. As soon as the time was right. Sheila rang him up and gave him his total. After he'd paid, he waved to Natalie. "I'll see you tonight." She smiled and nodded. "I'll text you my address." "I didn't even think of that." "I guess you don't live at the candy store." "Too much temptation. I'm not willing to run 12 miles per day." He laughed, wishing he could get closer to her. There was something a tad bit off about her face, and he couldn't help but wonder if Sheila had told some half-truths. It was her specialty, after all. He drove to the park at the corner of 5th and Main and got out of the truck. "Let's just walk for a minute while we talk." Nick shrugged. "What do you want to talk about?" "Your place in the world. I know the last couple of months have been confusing." "You can say that again." Nick shook his head. "I haven't seen my mom since I came to the ranch." "Did you know that?" Of course Caleb knew that. He knew everything about the 6 boys that were currently under his care. "I did know that." "Do you want to see your mom?" Nick shrugged. "I don't know. I mean, she yelled at me a lot, and I never liked my stepdad, but she's my mom. I should want to see her, shouldn't I?" "You tell me. Was your mom ever mean to you?" Nick stared straight ahead. "Isn't every parent mean sometimes?" "Sometimes. I thought my parents were the meanest people alive when I didn't get the video game I wanted for Christmas, but I think you and I both know that's not really mean, don't we?" Nick shrugged. "She was always that kind of mean." Caleb nodded. "Most parents are." "Was she ever any other kind of mean?" "Only after she married my stepdad. And he was the real mean one, not Mom." "How was he mean?" Nick shrugged. "I don't want to talk about it." "Then you don't have to. I can understand not wanting to talk about that kind of thing. But I also want you to know that if you ever do want to talk about it, I'm here. And if you don't want to talk to me, then talk to Adam. Or any of the other people on the ranch. We all care about you and have your best interests in mind." "Whatever." Nick took a bite of his fudge, and Caleb handed him the bottle of water he'd gotten for him. "Thanks." Caleb kept walking on in silence, knowing from experience that he'd said enough for now. "Would you think less of me if I'd let people be mean to me?" Nick finally asked. Nothing would make me think less of you. I see the young man you really are, not what life made you before. Caleb waited again, wondering if Nick would finally tell them how he'd been treated. They had an idea of what had transpired to make him act out the way he had, but there was no proof. I don't think anyone should treat kids the way they treated me. Nick kicked a rock as he spoke. How long was your mom married to your stepdad? They got married when I was 10. Nick rubbed his arm, and Caleb looked at it more closely. He saw a small scar that looked like it could have been made by a cigarette. He'd look more closely when Nick didn't realize he was being observed later. And he was never nice to you? Nick laughed, but the sound wasn't at all humorous. Nice? It felt like a good night when he didn't lock me in my room. Did he do that a lot? Caleb asked, continuing his pace. He'd heard a lot of stories of abuse over the years, and he hated to listen to stories like this. But he was so glad Nick was finally opening up. Sure. Usually at least 4 nights a week. The other nights, he used me to put out his cigarettes. Caleb could picture what he was saying, but he had to clarify. You mean he'd have you put it out for him? Nick shook his head. No, he liked to burn my skin with them. And he'd call me a baby if I cried. His voice was steady, as if he was telling a story that had happened to someone else. Is that how you got that mark on your arm? Caleb asked, keeping his voice calm. He couldn't let on that what Nick had faced was anything terrible, or the boy might clam up. Yeah. And my back is covered. Sometimes it hurt too much to wear a shirt, and he'd make me stay home from school. And your mom never tried to stop it? Caleb asked. That's what bothered him the most. The boy's mother hadn't stood up for him. At first, she did, but it only made it worse, so she stopped. Nick shrugged. He hit her a lot, too. So he burned you, and he hit you? Sure. He said that I was a mouth he shouldn't have to feed. He never liked me at all, and he made that really clear. Nick shrugged. So I started getting in trouble. I hoped that someone would notice and help me and my mom get away. Nick stopped walking and looked at Caleb. My mom isn't ever coming to get me, is she? Caleb looked into the boy's face and saw that he could take the truth. He was getting no pricks of danger coming their way. No, she's not. We get to keep you. Get? You mean you're stuck with me forever? Nick's eyes had tears shining in them, and he looked at Caleb defiantly. No one wants a kid like me. We do. I hope you know that we love you. You have a forever home with us. Why would you keep me? Nick truly couldn't understand, and it was clear on his face. I didn't want to live when I first came here, but y'all said I should. You think that I'm worth something? I know you're worth a lot. My mom thinks you're wonderful. Can't you tell? Lillian loves everybody. She does. But she thinks you're special. Caleb looked at the boy for a moment. I think what you need is a day with her. I'm going to talk to her and see when is good for her. She's too busy to spend a whole day with me. No, she's not. Not at all. Caleb started walking again, this time toward his truck. After Nick got in, he said, Hang on a second. I'll be right there. He pulled his phone from his pocket, tapping on a number. Hello? His mother's voice helped calm him. He had so much anger raging through him after what Nick had told him. Hey, Mom. I have a boy in need of some love. Nick? She asked. You always know. He closed his eyes for a moment. He just told me that his stepdad used him to put out his cigarettes. I saw a burn on his arm, and he said his back is covered with them. No. Lillian had seen a great deal of horrific things in the boys who had come through her house. But she felt for each boy, and she never became jaded. Not my Nick. He needs a day with you. Soon. I know you can't Saturday, but when you can. Adam told me you were pulling him out of school today. Have you done that? Yeah, I have him now. We just went for a walk through the park, and he told me things I never wanted to know. Caleb took a deep breath. I have a feeling there's a lot more to it, but that's all he said so far. Bring him to me. I'll keep him until bedtime tonight. I'm going to be making some food for the reception, but he can help me with that. Are you sure? I'm not trying to dump him on you. I know you're not. His mom sighed. He needs me today. I understand that perfectly. Bring him over and come get him right before bed. All right. Love you, Mom. Every time he heard a horror story from one of the boys, he remembered just how fortunate he'd been to be raised by two people who loved him unconditionally. Love you, too. Caleb got into the truck and started it. I'm taking you to Lillian. She said she needs someone to help her cook. You told her what I said. Nick's voice wasn't accusing. I did. I needed her to understand what you've been through. I'll tell Adam too, but I won't tell anyone else unless you want me to. Caleb would like to tell all of his brothers so they'd be able to help him better, but he would keep his word if that was what Nick wanted. Nick seemed to think about it for a moment. Don't tell the other boys. You can tell Benjamin and the other McClains. Just not Hunter or any of the others. Will do. And thanks for letting me tell my brothers. We'll all be able to help you better when we understand exactly what's happened to you. Caleb drove toward the ranch. He wanted to punch someone or something, but taking care of Nick was so much more important. I'm going to cancel your counseling with Adam today, too. He might come to the house and bug you while you and Mom are cooking, though. Nick shrugged. That would be all right if he wanted to. I'll tell him that. Caleb was surprised Nick was being so easy about it all. It wasn't like him at all. There's more. Nick said the words softly, staring out the opposite window. Do you want to tell me? Nick shook his head. Not today. No one needs to know everything yet. Caleb felt like he knew what was coming, but he simply nodded. All right. When you're ready, you'll be surrounded by McClains, and we'll all listen. After a moment, Nick said, Thank you. It was the first time Nick had really acknowledged that being listened to was important to him. Caleb smiled. Remember what I said. We all love you, and we're keeping you. No matter what's happened to you in the past, you're ours now. I kind of like the sound of that. And no matter what you do in the future, we're keeping you. You won't like the consequences for bad behavior, so you might as well decide to be an angel. Nick laughed. I don't think there's any way anyone could ever call me an angel. A fallen one maybe, but not the good kind. Just remember, what's happened to you in the past is not what defines you. What you do to change your life, to make yourself better, those are the things that matter. You're Nick, a strong, intelligent, young man. Never again can those people hurt you, because you belong to the McClains now. And do the McClains belong to me? Nick asked, his voice filled with humor. Every single one of us. Caleb knew the boy had been joking, but he wasn't. Nick needed to understand that as much as he was theirs, they were his. He was loved, and that was all there was to it. Chapter 7. After dropping Nick off with his mom, Caleb headed to Adam's office. When he got there, Brittany looked at him skeptically. Again? You've been here as much as I have this week. Caleb grinned. Sorry. I need to talk to Adam. All right. He said to send you back when you got here. Thanks. Caleb went down the hall and knocked on his brother's office door, going in before Adam called him. We need to talk. Did you get there in time? Adam asked. Yup. Nick's with Mom. Ouch. Was his day that rough? Adam knew as well as the rest of them that a day with Mom was saved for the very worst of days. There's a kid at school tormenting him about how no one wanted him, so he had to come to us. And we don't want him either, and we only keep him because we get paid. He would have fought him this afternoon. No doubt in my mind. Caleb shook his head. You convinced him otherwise. It wasn't a question. Adam knew his brother would never let one of their boys believe that he wasn't cared about. Yup. And I took him for some sweets at the new candy store in town. And then I took him for a walk in the park. He opened up? His stepdad used him to put out his cigarettes. When Adam flinched, Caleb knew he understood his meaning. I saw a burn on his arm, but he said most of them are on his back. He locked him in his room. A lot, from what he said. But, he told me that's not the worst of it. You think it was sexual abuse? Caleb shrugged. I'm not sure, but that's my guess. I hate that he went through that, but I'm thrilled we finally have a starting point. We can begin rebuilding now. Does he know you were going to tell me? Adam asked. Caleb nodded. I told him I had to tell you and Mom. I asked permission to tell the others, and he said I could tell anyone whose name was McClain. I think we're building some trust. It hasn't taken as long as I thought it would, honestly. I feel for him. The first day he was here, I could tell he'd been through a lot, but I wasn't sure how to get through to him. Good work, Caleb. Thanks. Caleb let out a whoosh of air. I need to get some lunch. If I give you cash, would you go to Taco Bueno and get food for me and my lady? She would kill for Taco Bueno. Caleb shrugged. Sure. I don't have anything against Bueno. Adam pulled a 20 from his wallet. Get your lunch, too. I'll buy since you're picking stuff up. He quickly wrote down his order as well as Tiffany's. Thanks, bro. No problem. I'll be back in 30. Caleb was happy to have a few minutes in the truck by himself. He was still angry about the way Nick had been treated. It had been everything he could do to not show it to the boy. Why did people think it was all right to treat their children that way? He'd never understand it. He understood all the theories about cycles of abuse, and he had never been hurt, so it was impossible for him to truly understand. It wasn't his job to understand why the abuse happened. It was his job to pick up the pieces after the abuse. And he was getting very good at his job. Asterisk. It was shortly after 9 that evening when Caleb pulled up in front of the small apartment Natalie lived in. He wanted to go to her and spill his guts, telling her everything about the family and announcing they were destined to be married. He'd learned from his brother's mistakes, though, and he would be careful about any information that he gave her until it was absolutely necessary. He knocked on her door, a copy of Singing in the Rain in his hand. He was sure she'd seen it at least as often as he had, but it was a feel-good movie, and that night, he needed to feel good. He waited, and when she opened the door, he grinned at her. Hi, you. Hi. Natalie opened the door wide, inviting him in. Did you have a good day? Caleb laughed. The absolute worst, but I can't talk about it, so we should just change the subject now. All right. Do you want to talk? What's that movie? Singing in the Rain, but I'm sure you've seen it a bazillion times like I have. It just always pulls me out of my moods. Caleb looked around her tiny apartment. The kitchen was so small, he was shocked. He'd never seen anything quite that small. She invited him to sit on the couch. Would you mind if we talked for a bit before the movie? She had to ask him about the accusations Sheila had made. If she was satisfied with his answers, they could watch the movie afterward. Sure. What do you want to talk about? He asked, frowning a bit. She sighed. I hate even asking, but I'm not one to take rumors at face value. I'd rather confront the person they're about and find out the truth. And you heard rumors about me today. He scrubbed his hands over his face. He wasn't quite ready for the conversation he knew they were about to have, but it would be better to get it out of the way. If she rejected him after she found out the truth, then so be it. It would be the perfect ending to the day he'd just had. She nodded. Not just you. About your whole family. Sheila has hated us ever since Benjamin wouldn't go out with her, and she's one of the biggest gossip mongers in all of Bagley. Caleb's eyes met hers. Tell me exactly what she said, and I'll tell you how close to the truth it all is. She said that your family is odd. Isn't everyone's? I don't deny it. He gave her one of his half grins that made her heart beat just a bit faster. You don't? She took a deep breath. She said something happened in English when you were in high school. You stood up in the middle of class and said there would be a fire, and the whole school was evacuated. And then the fire came. That's true. He sighed. Okay, I'm going to lay it all on the line with you, and you can decide if you want to believe me or not. He hated the defensive tone in his voice, but this was just too much more on top of the bad day he'd already had. I'm the son of a seventh son. Every generation of men in my family, going back as far as we can tell, has had 7 sons. Each seventh son has 7 sons. And the seventh son always has some sort of mystical power. My dad has the ability to see the future. Her eyes widened, but she nodded. I'd heard something about the seventh son thing. It's true. Anyway, every 7th generation, it's not just the 7th son that has powers. All of the sons do. And I'm part of that 7th generation. He ran his fingers through his hair and got off the couch, starting to pace back and forth. He was going to need sugar or danger pretty quick. I have the ability to foresee danger. I sense when I'm near it. Nick didn't have a doctor's appointment today. Well, he did, but not one he needed to be pulled out of school for. I sensed that if he stayed in school, he'd be in danger. He was going to get into a fist fight. He'd hit his head on something, and he wouldn't ever fully recover. Really? He nodded. Really? When I sensed that would happen, I drove to the school and pulled him out. Then he and I got candy and went for a walk in the park. He sat down beside her again, being careful not to touch her at all. He had never told this entire story to anyone before, though he knew it well. It was strange sharing the secret that had been hidden by his family his entire life. Adam is an empath. He senses others' emotions. That would make him a good psychiatrist, wouldn't it? She wasn't sure she believed him, but it certainly made sense with what Sheila had told her earlier that day. It makes him a very good psychiatrist. Caleb leaned back, sensing she was actually listening to him and not just shutting him out. Benjamin has the ability to commune with the earth and make plants grow. Really? Yup. It's how he met his fiancée. Her pumpkin patch was dead, and he made it grow. Overnight, she went from a dead patch to perfect pumpkins. That must have been a little bit freaky for her. Natalie couldn't imagine learning about them that way. More than a little bit, Caleb acknowledged with a wink. Then Daniel has the ability to heal. He can't heal huge things like cancer, but he can mend a broken arm or a cut. Very helpful with 30 rambunctious boys running around the ranch. I can see that. Natalie wasn't sure she could believe him, but she found she didn't disbelieve him, which surprised her. Ephraim can talk to and heal animals, big and small. Frank has one of those powers that was made for a boy's ranch. He can project an aura that calms down everyone around him. So if I'd known we would be having this discussion tonight, I probably would have brought him along and had him use his powers before I started explaining. She laughed softly. I think that would have been wise. Though she wasn't nearly as upset as she would have thought she'd be. Everything he was telling her seemed true to her. And Gideon? Gideon is the truly special one. He's got all of our powers, just to a lesser degree. So he can calm the boys with him if necessary. He can sense danger, but only if a person is with him. He's an empath, but he's not clobbered over the head with people's emotions, he just feels them when they touch. Caleb shrugged. If I was going to be jealous of any of my brothers, it would be Gideon, but I wouldn't want the responsibility he has. What responsibility? The next generation of 7 sons will come from him. He'll be the one running the ranch. It's all on Gideon's shoulders. Natalie shook her head. I wouldn't want to have to deal with all that. Me neither. He frowned at her. You believe me, don't you? I do. I'm not sure why I do, but I do. She studied him for a moment. This seems like it's a secret you would tell no one. Why me? He shrugged. Dad said you were safe. The other thing she said was that you'd all marry in birth order, and now that Adam and Benjamin have found wives, you would be on the lookout for a wife. She was wrong about that. I knew I was next, so I avoided women. I decided I wouldn't go anywhere I could possibly meet a new woman, but I wanted your homemade candy so badly, so I walked in not looking up. I didn't know if it would be a man or woman in the store, but I knew if I kept my gaze locked on the display case, I couldn't meet someone new. And if I couldn't meet someone new, I couldn't fall in love, so I couldn't marry. It was a good plan, don't you think? She frowned. But you looked at me. I did. And I immediately knew that if I was ever going to marry and be happy, it would have to be to you. You're the only woman in the world for me, Natalie. No pressure, though, right? Natalie stood and walked across the room, needing to put some distance between them. You think we're destined for each other? I know we are. After I met you, I mentioned you to Mom, and she told me Dad had told her about you. You're the one for me. Caleb watched her face, wondering if she was going to pull a Melissa and run. Instead, she watched him. What if I don't want to marry you? Then you don't have to. If you'll notice, I haven't even asked you. I'm just telling you that what she said was partially true. I wasn't looking for a wife, though. I was trying to avoid finding one. She laughed. And how did that work for you? Caleb shrugged. I don't know. I felt something the moment I saw you. I know that you're the woman God intended just for me, but I don't know what I should do about it. Not yet, anyway. I was trying to take things slowly and just watch a movie with you. I never planned to discuss destinies with you this evening. I'm aware I forced the talk on destinies. But I do want to take it slowly and get to know you better. Is there a time frame that you all need to be married within? She didn't want to mess up his destiny, but she wasn't ready to jump into a marriage without having both eyes open. Not at all. If I marry or don't marry is up to me. I think the other brothers could all marry anyway, though it's never happened that way. I know this is all a little bit crazy, but that's my life. Natalie walked back over to the couch and sat beside him. I'm sitting beside a man I've never even kissed, and he tells me we're destined to be married. Do you have any idea how strange that is? Is that your way to ask me to kiss you? Because you really don't have to ask twice. I've been dying to kiss you from the first moment I saw you. I'm not asking, but I won't say no if you do. He laughed. I like you, Natalie Smythe. I'm not in love with you yet, but the pull is strong. He cupped her cheek with his hand. So am I allowed to kiss you? I already said I wouldn't say no. Weren't you listening? He leaned down and gently brushed his lips against hers. It was as if electric shocks went straight through his body. How had she caused such intense feelings so quickly? When he lifted his head, her aquamarine eyes were warm and inviting him to lean down for another kiss. I think I should probably go. I never intended to stay for super long, because we both have early days tomorrow. Natalie stared at him for a moment. Does that mean you didn't enjoy kissing me? I enjoyed it too much. I'm going to go home. May I come back tomorrow night? She nodded. I think that would be all right. I'd like it if you'd come to the ranch for supper on Friday night. My mother does a huge cookout, and we all go. Every son, every boy, and every ranch employee. How often does she do that? Natalie asked, thinking of all the work that would entail. Every Friday night. Please come. I want you to meet all my brothers. You'll love them. Natalie nodded, walking him to the door. Sounds lovely. He leaned down and kissed her once more, quickly this time. I'll see you tomorrow evening, if I can manage to stay away from your candy store all day. She stood and watched as he got into his truck and drove away. He'd given her a lot to think about. Why didn't it bother her that she was destined to marry him? Probably because she'd felt it from the first moment they'd met, just as he had. As she got ready for bed, her thoughts were consumed with everything he'd told her. She was his destiny. But that didn't mean she didn't have full control of her future, which was good. She wasn't sure she was ready to marry him or anyone else. She'd moved there to start a candy store, not be wrapped up in the destiny of a man she hadn't known existed. Chapter 8. The following day went smoother for Caleb, though he was constantly worried about how Natalie would feel after she'd thought about what he'd told her. Nick was back in school, and he wasn't even a little bit nervous. His partial day off the day before had really helped him. At lunchtime, he decided to go to the diner in town, and he stopped by the candy store to see if Natalie could break away to join him. When he walked in, he saw Sheila at the front counter. She was always friendly to his face, but not necessarily behind his back. He treated her the same way he'd treat a poisonous snake. Very cautiously. How can I help you, Caleb? Sheila asked. Believe it or not, I'm not here to buy any candy. I was hoping I could steal your boss lady away for lunch at the diner. Today's special is chicken fried steak. He could see Natalie in the kitchen, her hair pulled back into a ponytail, and a big white apron covering her clothes. Natalie tilted her head to one side, considering his offer. Sounds delicious. She untied her apron and hung it on a hook. I'll be back soon, Sheila. Do you want me to bring you anything? Sheila shook her head. No, I'll just go to lunch after you. All right. Hold down the fort. Natalie hurried around the counter and took the hand Caleb held out to her. She knew Sheila would be nervous seeing the two of them leave hand in hand, and truly she hoped the other woman thought a bit about her gossiping ways. When they were settled in his truck, Caleb turned to Natalie. Does this mean you're okay with everything I told you last night? Natalie nodded. I'm not sure okay is the right word, but I believe you. I probably shouldn't, but I do. And I'm all right with it, as long as I know that free will is still involved. If I decide you're a freak of nature who shouldn't be allowed to speak to humans, I don't have to marry you. Caleb laughed. I promise, you can choose if you want to marry me or not. Sounds good. Tell me, Caleb, is Sheila still watching us? Caleb glanced toward the front of the candy store and sat that she was definitely still watching. Yup. Then kiss me. And make it look good. I want her to see that we're still all right, even though she told me all those stories. Natalie leaned toward him, raising her lips. Don't have to ask me twice. He wrapped his arms around her and kissed her softly, one hand moving up to toy with her hair. After a moment, he lifted his head. How was that? Very nice. She grinned at him. Didn't you say something about feeding me? Are you saying you'd rather eat than kiss me? Are you kidding? Yup. I'm hungry. I work in a candy store, and I only let myself have 2 pieces per day. It's like my very own version of self-torture. 5 minutes later they were at the diner, and he led her inside. They sat down, only to have Miss May appear with menus a minute later. Chicken fried steak is the special today and every Wednesday. Do you know what you want to drink? Just water for me, Natalie told her. I'll have a Dr. Pepper. After Miss May had walked off, Natalie wrinkled her nose. I don't know how you can drink that stuff. Don't kiss me after drinking it, okay? You don't like Dr. Pepper? Are you sure you're from Texas? Positive. And I'm third generation, too. He shrugged. I'm not sure how that's even possible, but okay. He nodded to her menu. You going to bother with that thing? Or just get the chicken fried steak? I think I'll get the chicken fried steak. It was one of her weaknesses. How could anyone not love chicken fried steak? Good choice. I swear, their chicken fried steak is one of the best things I've ever put in my mouth. It's almost as good as my mom's, and that's saying a whole lot. He truly believed his mother was the best cook in Texas, maybe in the whole country. Why don't you have your mom make it, then? Caleb shook his head emphatically. With as much cooking as my mom is constantly doing, there's no way I'm going to ask her to do more. She's an incredible cook, but she also doesn't really get paid for it, and it's not fair to ask her to do more and more. I'm glad you have that kind of respect for her. Natalie was more impressed with him by the minute. He was a good man who really respected his mother. She couldn't find a thing wrong with that. Wait until you see the kind of cooking she does for Friday night supper. Even with Benjamin and Melissa getting married the next day, she'll put on a huge spread. You will simply be amazed. Does anyone help her with it? He shook his head. She starts early Friday morning, and she cooks all day long. It's seriously amazing. Often, she'll have Dad make a brisket on the grill or make some hot dogs and hamburgers, but everything else is made with her own two hands. I really think she's a miracle worker. Awesome. I can't wait. The more she learned about the McClain family, the more amazed she was by them. They were truly special people. I'll pick you up at 6 on Friday? Supper officially starts at 6:30, so that gives us time to get there. I'd like that. Miss May brought their drinks, eyeing Natalie. You're new in town. Natalie nodded. I opened the new candy shop, which I still need a name for. I can't keep calling it the candy shop forever. I guess not, but that's what folks in town will call it anyway. Miss May put her pen to paper. What can I get you? Chicken fried steak. Mashed potatoes okay? Yes, please. What else would anyone eat with chicken fried steak? Natalie was of the opinion that chicken fried steak came with white gravy and mashed potatoes. Period. What kind of dressing for your salad? Natalie considered for a moment. Ranch. Exact same thing for me, please, Caleb said. All right. Give me a few to get your salads. Miss May studied him for a minute. Don't go marrying the girl just because she makes candy for a living, no. Make sure you care about her first. Caleb laughed. I promise I will make sure I love any woman before I marry her. Oh, please. I know how you McClains work. You've been seen in public with her. I expect to hear about an engagement any day. I haven't even bought a ring yet. But he knew he would, and probably soon. She'd made it through the test to see if she could handle their strange family. What else could he really ask for in a wife? But you will. She seems sweet enough. Has your mama met her yet? Miss May asked with all the confidence of someone who had known him for his entire life. They met Monday. Caleb didn't really care what Miss May said about how fast the men in his family married. He just hoped it didn't bother Natalie. I hope you'll be happy together. With those words, Miss May wandered off toward the kitchen to place their order. So being seen in public with you is the same as announcing our engagement? Natalie asked, shaking her head. Your family is a bit strange, you know. He grinned. I never denied it. Taking a sip of his Dr. Pepper, he watched her face, wondering if it bothered her that people were jumping to conclusions about them. Are you still coming over after lights out tonight? You left your movie, so we could watch it. She wanted as much time with him as she could get. He nodded. I'll be there. Benjamin knows that I get to leave after lights out every night this week. He's had a lot of time with Melissa, and he's seeing her during the day, so I get after bed hours. It's my turn. Sounds fair to me. She moved her hand to the middle of the table where it was touching his. Caleb grinned. I like how you let me know what you want and need. I think I want to keep you. He wove his fingers through hers, happy to touch her. She sighed. Most men would say, I think I'm falling in love, but you? I think I want to keep you. Like you're going to put me in your pocket to take out when you want to look at me. He laughed. Sorry if I made it seem that way. What I really mean to say is I want to spend the rest of my life making you happy. Is that better? She made a face. I'm not sure if I'm ready to hear that yet, either. Maybe you could just feed me and watch movies with me for now. That works, too. I told you I wasn't very experienced with women. I guess it's really obvious now, huh? Caleb felt at a loss, but he didn't care. He was going to play it by ear. Maybe a bit. I kind of like it, though. He frowned at her, trying to understand. You do? She nodded. It means that you live exactly as you seem to live. You're not running around hitting on random women and getting experience. You're just a simple rancher who takes care of boys for a living. I am. I very much am. I hope you don't mind that. My whole life is in transition at the moment. Benjamin is my partner with the boys, and he is going to start living outside the house. I'll be there with them at night, and that's enough while they sleep, but he'll come for the mornings and the evenings. It'll just be a bit strange. It makes you feel uneasy, doesn't it? He shrugged. I'm not great with change. I'll have to go do something crazy this afternoon, and I'll feel better. Crazy? In what way? He shrugged. I might go ride my four-wheeler in the herd of cattle. That helps sometimes. Or I could do some other thing that would get my adrenaline up. I'm an adrenaline junkie. She frowned. I don't like that at all. What if you get hurt? He shrugged, getting quiet as their salads were put in front of them. I never get hurt. I know when I will, because of my danger warning, so I just don't do something if there's danger involved for me. To him it was simple. Cut and dried. By the look on her face, he could see she didn't see it the same. She shook her head. What if your power fails, and you get hurt? My power never fails. I know it sounds a little crazy to someone who hasn't known me long, but even my brothers don't question it anymore. They tell me to go jump off a bridge when I get edgy. Please tell me you've never done that. Sure, I have. Into a river. He shrugged. Was fun and made me feel better for a bit. I can live with your power, but I'm not sure I can live with you putting yourself in danger all the time. That scares me. He frowned. Seriously? It bothers you? Yes. I can't imagine how I'd feel if I was trying to raise 7 boys on my own. She shook her head emphatically. No way. Only the youngest has 7 sons. There's a chance for daughters for us. She glared at him. I don't care if we have boys or girls. I won't be left a widow because I'm married to a man who sees danger as a challenge. He sighed. We're jumping the gun here. I don't even have a ring yet, remember? Of course, he was thinking about looking at them after lunch. Maybe he should put that off, though. If she was that concerned about his penchant for danger, It might be time he learned to do without his adrenaline rushes, if he even could. I need to think about whether or not I could tolerate that. She pushed her salad bowl away. How can you do that, knowing you have all those boys looking up to you? I trust my powers. I understand you don't. I'll try to stop. You will? She was surprised to hear him say that. You'd really stop with the adrenaline rushes for me? He nodded. I would try. I can't make any promises. I've been doing it since I was a small boy, and it's pretty ingrained at this point. I bet your mother hated it. She doesn't talk about it much, but I think she does. I guess I should spend more time thinking about how the people around me worry when I do dangerous things than I do. I'll do my very best to be more careful. It wouldn't be easy. Maybe he should take up needlepoint or something. He was sure the boys would be highly amused. Thank you. Natalie had been able to keep her heart separate from him until that moment. Knowing he would try to change something that was so much a part of him for her made her realize he was as serious about her as she was about him. In just 48 hours, something had changed inside her. It's going to sound corny, but I mean it. I'd do anything for you. He squeezed her hand tightly. Miss May put their plates on the table. I'll get another water and a Dr. Pepper. And no more mushy stuff in the diner. It's messing with my head. She wandered off with their glasses in hand. Caleb sighed heavily, calling after her. You sure do know how to spoil a moment, Miss May. No more moments in my diner. You hear me, Caleb McClain? I hear you. He shook his head, catching Natalie's eye. She giggled. Now you know why I moved out of Wiggyville to start over. I didn't need to be treated like I was still a child every day for the rest of my life. No, but you giggle when I am. He frowned at her. What's up with that, anyway? She shrugged. I don't see you as a boy. I see you as an almost larger-than-life man who makes my heart beat faster. And there you are, being treated like a child by everyone around you. It's fun. He took her hand and brought it to his lips. It's nice to have someone see me for who I am now, and not for who I was 10 or 15 years ago. Well, I do, and I'm not sure I could change that if I wanted to. I'm watching you too. Miss May put their refills on the table, shaking her head. No lovey stuff in this diner. You hear me? Caleb got to his feet and caught Miss May in a huge hug, kissing her cheek. Not even if we're being lovey with you? Miss May, old enough to be his grandmother, swatted his arm. You stop that nonsense, or I'll be talking to your mother. She had a huge grin on her face as she walked away. That was really sweet, you know. Natalie had even more respect for him now. He frowned. What was sweet? The way you made her feel like $1 million. He shrugged. She's always been like a grandmother to me. I love her. She smiled, happy that he could so easily feel and express his emotions. It was almost like he was her dream man. She cut into her steak and took a bite, closing her eyes. I never should have tried this. I will be here every day just for their chicken fried steak. He grinned. I love it. I come most Wednesdays, because that's when it's on special. She hadn't considered how little money he must make. Let me buy lunch today. He shook his head. Absolutely not. I invited you, so it's my treat. But. No, buts. I make a good salary, and I don't really have any living expenses except my car. Oh, I was a little worried about that. My family has owned the land the boys' ranch is on since right after the Texas War of Independence. We're not hurting for money in any way. Natalie nodded, understanding a little better. How did you come to have a boys' ranch on your family's property? My great-grandfather married a girl who had been raised mostly in an orphanage. She ended up being adopted, but she was already a teenager, and she worked as a seamstress. He always knew he'd marry a seamstress named Penny, and when one of his brothers heard she was living in nowhere, he went to meet her. They were married not long after. That's cool. So she was a vision of his? Yes. Just like my dad has visions of who we'll all marry. Anyway, shortly after they were married, there was a fire at the boys' home here in town. It was run by the church. They hurried into town to fight the fire, but everything was lost, and the church didn't have money to rebuild. So Penny McClain, who knew she'd have 7 boys of her own, declared those boys were hers, and she took them home with her. The cabins that they built to live in that summer still stand on ranch property. I'll show them to you sometime soon. That's neat. She smiled dreamily. I don't know any fun stories like that about my ancestors. It sounds like you know everything about your family. I kind of do. It's strange, but my whole family has always kept track of stuff like that. I could go back at least 15 generations with a story for each family. Do you have any writing skills? Because those are stories I would read. No, I really don't. I wish I did. He ate the last bite of his chicken fried steak. I need to get you back. We took much longer for lunch than we probably should have. Natalie shrugged. That's all right. I think Sheila will forgive me, don't you? He laughed, checking the time on his phone. I need to be back to the ranch within an hour. I usually work all day, and today I've been a wastrel. Sometimes being a wastrel is what you need to do. He threw money on the table to cover their meals and a generous tip for Miss May. Let me get you back to work. As much as I love my job, I'm sad I don't get to spend the rest of my day with you. His arm went around her shoulders. Me too. What's wrong with us? She didn't answer. What could she say? I don't know about you, but I'm in love? That wouldn't work. As much as she cared, and as much as she was starting to trust him, she couldn't give any man that much power over her. Not yet, anyway. Chapter 9. Nick was in much better spirits that evening, which thrilled Caleb. He wasn't pleased he had to make up his time with Adam, but he did it without too much complaining. When Caleb met him at Adam's office with Hunter in tow to lead him to the area where everyone was working, Nick said, "My head feels smaller." You happy now? Got it shrunk, did you? Caleb had heard the joke many times over the years. The boys always referred to their therapy sessions that way. I did. Nick looked at Hunter, who was fast becoming his closest friend. They were roommates there on the ranch, and were always together when it came to work crews. What job are they torturing us with today? Mending fences, Hunter said with a groan. Every boy there hated to mend fences almost as much as they hated mucking out the stables. It was not a pleasant job, but someone had to do it. Yuck. How'd we draw the short straw? Nick asked. There was no short straw, Caleb responded. Everyone was well behaved, so we're rotating through all the stuff everyone hates. You need to learn to do it all anyway. Why? Nick asked. It's not like I'm going to be a cowboy. A dark man who was walking toward them stopped. He was dressed like a cowboy. I said that when I first came to the ranch 15 years ago. Guess what? I never left, and I'm a cowboy here. You never know. Just learn everything they're willing to teach you. Who are you? Nick asked, wondering why the man even cared what he thought. I'm Max, and I love it here. I wouldn't leave the ranch for anything. Nick frowned as the man walked on. Did you plan that? He asked Caleb accusingly. How could I have planned that? I didn't know you were going to be whining about working at that exact moment. Caleb shook his head. No, he really was a boy on the ranch many years ago. He never moved away. You'd be surprised at how many of the boys that come here don't go. This becomes their forever home. Nick frowned. What if I don't want it to be my forever home? What if I want to go to college and be a business tycoon? Then you will be able to do that. We'll arrange for scholarships for you, and you'll go to college. Caleb didn't mention that the money from the fundraiser they had every year was split between the boys. Nick came after the fundraiser this year, but next year, he'd have a good amount of money in his trust fund. The boys never knew about the money until they were ready to be on their own, though. You'd really do that? Help me get scholarships for college? Caleb nodded. You keep your grades up, and we'll make sure you get to go to a university. If your grades are bad, then we can't make that happen. Oh. I see. Nick frowned down at the ground. Isn't now when you tell me that I'm worthless, and no college would ever want me? Hunter frowned at his friend. They don't say that here. The sky is the limit. We can do anything we set our minds to. Our pasts do not define our futures. Caleb grinned, ramming his shoulder into Hunter. You listen. Nick looked at the two of them, shaking his head. I listen, too. Sometimes. When you want to. Just let Hunter tell you what you should know. He obviously gets it. Asterisk. After the boys were in bed, Caleb filled Benjamin in on the new things that were going on with Nick. I really think he's settling in better than any of us expected. Good, Benjamin said. I think that kid has a whole lot of potential. He told me today that he doesn't want to be a cowboy. He wants to be a business tycoon. Good for him. Benjamin grinned. You off to see your girl? Yup. We had lunch together, and I think we're making good strides. Miss May was complaining about how lovey we were acting in her diner. Sounds like Miss May. Benjamin waved a hand. Go. Have fun. Just like that? You're too happy about this. Just then Melissa pulled up, getting out and walking toward Benjamin. Hey. Am I early? Caleb looked at his brother and shook his head. Busted. It's not against the rules. Benjamin protested, kissing Melissa in greeting. 3 more nights. Caleb walked straight to his truck. He didn't want to hear their sweet whispers. He wanted to go and see his own girl. On the short drive to town, he was tempted to drive fast, just to get some adrenaline going. But he remembered his promise to Natalie, and he drove the speed limit the whole way. When he got to her apartment, he hurried to the door, knocking softly. She came to the door with a grin. Hi, you. Caleb leaned down for a quick kiss. Hello. Sorry, I'm a little late. I needed to fill Benjamin in on some things that happened today. It must be interesting to work so closely with your brother on things. Do you ever wish you were more independent? Not at all. He walked over and sat on the couch, wondering if they'd finally get around to that movie. Benjamin was my roommate at home when we were growing up. He's always been my partner. When I wanted to do something crazy, then I asked Benjamin, and we got in trouble together. Sounds like a natural pairing. She sat down close beside him, and his arm immediately went around her shoulders. I sometimes wish I had siblings. I never really cared, but hearing you talk about yours makes me lonely for what I never had. I'll share mine with you. In fact, I'll just give them to you if you want. 6 is more than anyone should have to put up with. Natalie studied his face for a moment. Do you want many children? He shrugged. I want at least 3 or 4. All girls. All girls? You wouldn't know what to do with a girl. He frowned. I know what to do with you, but you're right. That's not the same at all. He waggled his eyebrows at her, and she giggled. Maybe we could have 2 of each. That would make me happy. Are you asking me to have babies with you, Natalie? 'Cause I have to say, I'm a bit shocked, and I think we should wait until after we marry for that kind of relationship. I'm just not that kind of man. She swatted his arm. You know as well as I do that's not what I was saying. He leaned over and kissed her forehead. I probably have another hour I can be here. Want to start the movie? Or we could sit here and make out. You're a mess, Caleb McClain. What would your mother say if she heard you saying all that? He shrugged. No idea. Good thing she's not here. Natalie shook her head at him. How did such a sweet lady raise you? There were 7 of us. I slipped through the cracks. I have a feeling your mother knew what you were doing all the time. Yeah, she and Dad were on top of things. It was so annoying. We didn't get into a whole lot of trouble. She poked him. From what I can tell, they were amazing parents. They really were. When one of the boys has a bad day, we send them to Mom. They usually end up being her kitchen slave for the day, but they love it because she showers them with praise, no matter what they do. He stared off into space for a moment. It was nice, because we all learned the best way to treat the boys who came to live at the ranch, because she showed us with everything she did. You sound like you had amazing teachers. You must be really good at what you do. I try. I'm not sure I could say I'm good. Adam is really good with the kids, and so is Gideon, because they feel the emotions. I'm decent, but I feel like I fail often. I just don't let it get me down. She was surprised to hear him say he felt like he failed often. He seemed like such a good man to her. What happens when you marry? What does that mean? I'll keep working with the boys, of course. But what happens with the house? People have to stay there with them, and if you're married, who stays in the house with the boys? I know you said Benjamin is moving in with Melissa. She couldn't think of his future being separate from hers. In her mind, they were practically married already. She just needed to iron out a few small details to be able to make a commitment. He frowned. You know, I'm not sure. I think when we're first married, we could live in the house with the boys. But we may need to hire someone to stay there after the babies start coming. What if we couldn't have kids? Would you be upset? That's never happened in my family. We seem to be able to have millions of babies. So you think your heredity will overrule mine? She frowned at him. Is that even possible? With my family it is. I don't know why, but it's true. Remember, I've done a study of my family's history. I sure wish you had someone who could write it down. What's the first ancestor you know about? She couldn't express how fascinating she found his family. Let me think. The first one I know of was a girl named Edith, who married a 7th son, so it was already happening. She was born in 1068, and her mother was said to be a healer. A healer? Like Daniel is? The stories say she was a great deal more powerful than Daniel. She could cure any disease or anything. She's rumored to have brought people back from the dead, but I can't imagine that's true. Maybe it is. I think that's really cool. I wish I could learn more about them. I wonder if there's any kind of information out there. Do you know the girl's mother's name? He thought for a moment, trying to remember every detail his grandfather had given him about the family history. His brothers hadn't been willing to sit and listen to some of the old stories, but Caleb had been fascinated by every word. I think her name was Marina. I know that sounds strange, and I'm not sure, but that's what it seems like I was told. You need to hire a genealogist. Can they go back that far? You know, I really think they can go back at least as far as the 13th century. Further, if the families were noble. Do you know if yours was? She wanted to volunteer to take on the project herself, but she was sure people would think she was insane. Her own family history didn't fascinate her half as much as his did. He nodded. Yes. At least from what I was told. Remember, this is all just family stories with no real proof. That's really cool, though. She looked at him, wondering what he was thinking about at that moment. Was he thinking that he wanted to spend forever with her, like she was thinking about him? She was actually surprised that he hadn't yet asked her to marry him. Yes, they'd only known one another a little over 2 days, but they had felt an instant connection, and his father had seen them as destined to be together. Suddenly, it was enough for her. Caleb had a ring in his pocket, and he desperately wanted to ask her to marry him, but was 2 days of knowing each other too soon? He knew it would be under normal circumstances, but he'd never had a normal circumstance in his life. Never. They chatted for a while longer, but he didn't find the courage to propose. Finally, he stood. I need to get home. 6 comes awfully early after a late night. Can you go back to sleep after the boys leave for school? I have the time to go back to sleep, but my body doesn't allow it. I know you get up early, too. Yes, but I've been sneaking in naps when I get home from work. That way I can spend more time with you. He leaned down and kissed her softly. Good night, Natalie. I'll see you tomorrow night. I'd like that. Natalie found she was now looking forward to every minute she could spend with Caleb. She'd moved all the way to Bagley to open a candy store, and she was spending all her time with a man. She'd never thought she could be a woman like that, and here she was. With one last kiss, Caleb hurried out the door. He wanted to stay all night, but that wouldn't be good for either of them. He had to find a way to propose. Why was he suddenly so nervous about it? Then it struck him why. Because he loved her. If he hadn't loved her quite so much, whatever answer she gave would be fine. Now he needed her to say yes. It meant everything to him. Chapter 10. On Friday evening, Caleb picked Natalie up at the store to take her to the ranch's weekly cookout. The ring he'd gotten her was burning a hole in his pocket, and he wanted to find just the right time to propose that evening. When he pulled onto the ranch property and she saw the sheer size of the gathering, her eyes grew wide. Your mother does this every week? The woman had to be crazy to put herself through that. He nodded. Every single week. We have fire pits around it for bonfires if it's too cold, but there are only a couple of weeks that are too cold. The rest of the time we use them for fun. The area is covered, so we can be out there, rain or shine. This has always been a big deal to Mom, so she had the covered picnic area built when I was a little boy. I don't remember a time when we didn't do this every week. What if Christmas falls on a Friday? More to celebrate. At least that's how Mom looks at it. I like the way she thinks. He held her hand in his as they approached the area where everyone was standing around laughing and having a good time. His mother spotted them and hurried over to hug her. It's good to see you, Natalie. Natalie smiled. Thank you for letting me come. This is amazing. She had a grocery bag in her hand and she gave it to Lillian. I brought some sweets for everyone. Oh. I've heard such good things about the candy you make. Not just from Caleb, but from Nick as well. Lillian hugged the bag to her. I have half a mind not to share. You sound like Caleb and his need for sugar. The only thing that surpasses his need for sugar is his need for those adrenaline rushes. He's never been hurt though, so his powers work. He's never been hurt? Natalie looked at Caleb with surprise. Not seriously, at least. He's never broken a bone, but he's skinned his knees and gotten little injuries. Lillian looked at Caleb. You need to bring her around more often. We like her, and she brings candy. With those words, she hurried off to get back to her hostess duties. Caleb led Natalie over to Adam, hoping his brother could tell him what she was feeling. He needed to know if it was a good time to propose or if he should wait. This is my brother Adam and his new wife Tiffany. Natalie sat down across from Adam. I've heard wonderful things about both of you. It's so nice to meet you. Adam smiled. And you're Natalie. I've heard good stuff about you, too. Caleb thinks a lot of you. He'd better, if we're destined to be married. Adam leaned forward. I know you know all the family secrets, but remember, the boys don't, and neither do the ranch employees. You're free to talk about those things, but keep your voice down as you do. Natalie nodded. I'm very sorry. I wasn't thinking. It's all right. It's a secret we've held close since we were able to know what a secret was. It's not the same for someone who just learned about it all. Adam smiled at her, his head tilted to one side. You know my power, I suppose? Yes, I do. It makes me a little uncomfortable to be around you. Don't let it, he said. You love my brother, and that's good enough for me. Caleb heard that and frowned. You love me, and I have to hear it from my big brother? I've been a walking mess, trying to figure out how you felt. Adam looked at Natalie and shook his head. Ignore him. He loves you, too. Caleb glared at Adam. You can't say that for the first time for us. Looks like I just did. Tiffany elbowed Adam. Not very nice at all. Adam sighed, looking between Natalie and Caleb. Sorry. I shouldn't have told you both that way. Very rude of me. He looked at Tiffany. Better? She nodded. Somewhat. They were never going to tell each other, because they were both afraid the other didn't feel the same way. I was trying to help. Caleb decided not to listen for another minute. He took Natalie's hand and pulled her away from his brother and the rest of the crowd. I do love you, you know. I love you, too. That was all he needed to hear. He dropped to one knee, right there in front of his entire family, all the boys on the ranch, and the ranch's employees. Natalie Smythe, I've loved you for hours and hours. Will you do me the great honor of being my wife? She nodded, tears popping into her eyes as he pulled a ring from his pocket and slipped it onto her finger. She ignored all the people she knew were watching and went into his arms, raising her lips for his kiss. I can't wait to be married to you. He kissed her quickly. You haven't even met all my brothers yet. You're going to get a quick lesson on all of them. You ready? She nodded. First is Frank. I don't think I need to give you birth order. Frank is the one with the calming aura. He led her to a man who had the same blue eyes as the other men in the family. She found them fascinating. Hi, Frank. It's nice to meet you. Frank enveloped her in a hug. Welcome to the family. Thank you. Her heart had been beating altogether too fast after the surprise of the proposal, but she found the beat slowing down to normal, and a sense of peace settled over her. Do you have to activate your power? Or does it just happen? Feeling calmer? He asked, his eyes twinkling. He obviously wasn't going to answer her question. Yes. Caleb laughed and took her hand, pulling her off toward the next brother. This is Benjamin. He's the one who's been letting me sneak off to see you at night. Natalie hugged Benjamin. I already feel like I know you. Ditto. Benjamin grinned. And this is my Melissa. You're coming to the wedding tomorrow, right? Wild horses couldn't keep me away from it. She smiled at Melissa. So nice to meet you. I heard you had a bumper crop of pumpkins this year. Melissa laughed. I sure did. So nice to meet you. I've heard good things from Caleb. Next, Caleb tugged her to Gideon. She could see that he was younger than the others, but he had a presence that Caleb lacked. He seemed older than he should. He had a woman beside him, and the two were laughing at something. This is my kid brother, Gideon, and our receptionist, who guards Adam as if she were a fire-breathing dragon. Natalie, Brittany. Brittany smiled at Natalie. Are you the next victim? Natalie laughed. I like to think of myself as extremely fortunate. Caleb's a good one. Just be glad you weren't stuck with this one. Brittany jerked her thumb at Gideon. It's really good to meet you both. Natalie barely had time to get the words out when she was dragged over to two brothers standing together. This is Daniel, and that one is Ephraim. Two of our resident doctors. Caleb grinned at his brothers. You must be the candy girl. I want to break into song, one of the men said to her. I'm Ephraim, the veterinarian brother. It's nice to meet you. Will you always call me Candy Girl? Ephraim nodded. You're my new sister. We have our funster, the country bumpkin, and now you, Candy Girl. He elbowed Daniel. You're next. Who are you going to bring home? Daniel shrugged. No idea, but I bet Dad could tell you. Natalie grinned, liking Caleb's brothers. I've always been an only child, and I'm about to get 6 brothers and 2 sisters overnight. When are you two getting married, anyway? Ephraim asked. No one ever tells me anything. Caleb shook his head. Ignore him. He's a bit touched in the head. He looked at his brother. We haven't talked about it yet. Soon, I hope. Like, next weekend would make me happy. Natalie blinked a couple of times and looked at him. Are you serious? You think we can pull a wedding together in a week? My mom puts on a meal like this every single week. You don't think she could put a wedding together? We could get married at next Friday night's cookout if we wanted. She looked at him for a minute, thinking about it. Let's. My parents can be here. I don't need anyone else. Seriously? You'll marry me next Friday? She nodded. I probably lost my mind, but I kinda like you. Let's do it. He wrapped his arms around her, picked her up off her feet, and spun her around. I was sure you'd make me wait for 6 months or so. You're the best. He kissed her there, in front of everyone. You're so silly. I want to get married too, you know. He grinned, and raised his voice so everyone could hear him. During next Friday night's cookout, we're going to have a wedding. We decided waiting a week was long enough. He looked at his mother. You got this? Lillian nodded. No problem. Tiffany hurried over. We're about the same size. Do you want to wear my dress? Natalie looked at her in surprise. Are you serious? You'd really let me borrow it? Tiffany smiled. I was an only child. Then I had 6 brothers. In a week, I'll have 2 sisters. Promise to be a sister to me, and you can wear the dress. Natalie laughed. I'd have been your sister without the dress. Tiffany hugged her tight. I can't wait. Later that evening, as he was driving her back to the store, Caleb smiled. I can't believe we're going to be married in a week. From the back seat, Hunter said, Great. Now the mushy stuff starts. Just a minute. I need to record this so I know how to act with the girl I'm about to marry. Natalie laughed. If I give you both a piece of taffy, will you be so busy chewing you won't make snide comments? Nick shook his head. Nope. We'll just do it with our mouths full. Caleb sighed. Living with the 6 of them is going to be a challenge. It's one I look forward to. Ignoring the boys, she waited while Caleb got out of the truck and ran around to open her door. When they reached the front door, she stood on tiptoes and kissed him. Love you. Love you too. Caleb said, ignoring the boys as they made loud gagging sounds. They must have opened the windows on the truck. Life really was going to be interesting.